now have the plot, we have the budget, we have planned for the things that we need, and we have also looked at planting and what to plant and when and how to manage your crop in that sense. We are now going to move on to composting, as I believe it's another very important aspect of biodynamic gardening. Can you tell us a bit more about composting, Hans?
Absolutely, yeah. It's our chemical kitchen where we brew the future fertility of the land and our enrichment and best nourishment. I used to be called the compost Hans when I worked in school and teaching school gardening, because I would go on about organic materials and where can we get everything to make this beautiful new soil, right? So what is a compost actually? So compost is taking plant material that grew the previous year or previous years, and we bring it together with your soil from the garden, and we bring it together with some moisture, we need water, and we bring it together with a bit of garden lime or wood ash from your wood fire. And lo and behold, you put that up in the right way, and we can just shortly elaborate how to do that in a minute, and pile it up. And I use everything. I have been landscaping in private gardens for over the last 25, 30 years now, and also working in different climate zones. All you need to do is to mix the material, build it up. I mean, even hedge trimmings, if they're thinner than your little finger, you don't need to even shred it. Don't get a shredder. Don't, cut it up. You want to employ the microorganisms in your soil that are everywhere, the microbiome, the bacteria, the fungus, the viruses. They're good viruses, they're not just bad viruses, it's the balance. The mushrooms, the macrolife, all these worms, all these spiders, all these ants, all the centipedes, the millipedes, the springtails, the array of soil life that we have, we want to actually multiply in the compost pile. We want to create a superfood. We talk all about superfoods for humans. We need superfood for animals in the soil, for the micro and macro life in the soil. And you put that in a pile, that's a minimum of maybe 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter, a cubic meter, because what you want is this to warm up. And these microorganisms that are everywhere, they're in the air, they're in the soil, they will invade this pile of organic material, soil, ash, and water, moisture, and it's a miracle. They eat it up, they decompose it, and then the miracle happens that actually these higher organisms like the mushrooms, so the mycelia, a lot of people might have heard of the mycelia and the mycorrhiza, and then these macroorganisms, springtails, and then the spiders and the ants and the earthworm and the compost worm, they make soil out of it. They make humus out of it. And it happens every day you walk over your lawn, you see the worm casts. And basically what happened in the soil over a long period of time in a compost pile happens in a short period in a very concentrated way. And all you have to do is pile that material together in the best way that I can describe in a minute. And you got new soil, you got fertilizer.
So I'm assuming, Hans, from what you're saying, that having a plastic container or a covered container where you make your compost, as some councils make available, is probably a no-no?
If you want to go for kitchen waste and you don't have a place where you can pile up material in the garden readily, you have a very small garden, it is advised, say you have kitchen waste and grass clippings and a few flower stalks, it is advisable that you could get a tumble compost bin or just a standing compost bin with the doors at the bottom. It's not ideal in a biodynamic sense because this material doesn't breathe readily and it creates a very highly concentrated effective humus which over fertilizes your plants if you put too much. You have to be very careful how much you put. But without even inoculating it with the wigglers, if it's outdoors on top of the bare soil, the compost worms come in. So these red wiggling little worms, they're very dark red, they come in and start digesting it from the bottom up. and from the top down, you put the new material, and the bacteria, the fungus, and the mushrooms and everything start destroying it, and then regenerating the compost and the humus. But it's an effective, short-lived humus, and you can apply that to the land. You can even have a little bucket with it. You know, people have it with a tap at the bottom till the liquid can drain away, and you can use the liquid as a liquid manure. So if you've just got a balcony in a flat and you have just windowsill boxes, you can make, you know, with the compost, worm compost, basically, and use that for your tubs, and grow your crops in there on a windowsill or on the balcony, what have you, or the terrace. And that's kind of the most concentrated way. And it goes very fast because you keep putting the kitchen compost, and it, you know, it just produces constantly new compost, and you can use that and put it on your flower pots and tubs and what have you. The other one is the plastic container in the garden, which in half a year you have that effective humus, which is very dark, rich, and smeary, fatty kind of type, you know, which has gone through the earth, the compost worm. And then you got the freestanding compost, and that, of course, is the ideal because that can breathe, that's exposed to the elements, and it really takes usually a year to make nice, stable humus that gives a structure to your soil.
Okay, so you know, you're laying out the importance of your own compost and creating your own compost, and how important that is to fertilize your crop and your soil. Can you tell us a little bit for people out there who may live in different types of houses? Some people, as you say, may need to grow in their own balconies. Some people may have a back garden. Some people may not. So where do you start?
Well, as I said earlier, all of us eat. We get kitchen waste,
cooked and raw.
Raw kitchen waste.
Okay.
Now, if you have cooked food, the only downside of cooked food is it takes longer to be digested by soil organisms, because they are often cooked with fats and things, and fats are the hardest to digest. And if you pile it outside, you would attract rats. So most people, they actually throw the cooked food away. I use everything. I mix everything, bones, everything into the compost pile. And we can later down the line in another series talk of how to keep the rats away in a homeopathic way without having fencing and all these precautions, because we can work through the energy and through the forces that are available to reject them. So I would say literally you could compost everything, as long as you make sure, now you've got this liquidy, heavy, smelly, you know, coffee grinds, tea bags and everything. It's really smelly. It's very acid material. You need to make sure that you balance that with something. You need something that's dry, stalky, aerating, and also you need something that balances the acidity, makes it more alkaline. So again, the wood ash, the garden lime, some sort of pH, high pH material needs to be used that's alkaline to balance that off. And you would just layer that and mix it with a bit of local soil in your compost pile, with your garden grass clippings, with your prunings, and just mix it all together. I think that way it's the least likelihood that you have any vermin, particularly if you put on that kitchen material, cover it well with wood ash, for example. The vermin does not like that burning sensation of the quicklime that, you know, that dries the skin and burns the skin.
Okay, so for those people who are going to have a compost pile, because I think if you have a container or something you're going to do it in your balcony, then you start chucking things in there. But if you are going to have a compost pile, presumably you have to choose a location first. You have to choose the appropriate location.
Okay. So that's a very good question, because for any compost, even on the balcony, if you're in, you know, bright sunlight and you have a plastic box, that box will heat up to about 60 to 80 degrees centigrade. It will get boiled.
Yeah.
Now, we can go out there and notice ourselves when we get too hot, but the soil life is much more sensitive. So the worms, they will function best at a temperature between 15 to 30 degrees if it gets above 30, they want to go and huddle up and round, like a round ball, and they want to go down where it's cool. If they're on a balcony, trapped in a plastic box, or in the garden, trapped in a box that's in the plain sun, they're going to die. They're going to just boil to death. And the same for the microbes, the microbiome of the compost, it will just die. So you're basically incinerating your compost material. So you want to look for the shady side. So you go to the south aspect of your garden or the north side of your house. So the south side of the garden has maybe a hedge. So the compost will be on the north side of your hedge that's in the south of the garden. And that way it's got shade all day long, and it's got a fairly even temperature to create its own body temperature. The compost pile is a living, feeling being that we're creating. It's with a soul, and most people don't think about it. There are feeling creatures in there. Even the microbes have feelings. We want to protect them.
Okay, so you choose a shady part, shade all the way, all day through, basically.
Yeah, if possible.
Yeah.
Or evening, morning sun obviously is not so severe. So if it's exposed morning or evening, it's not too bad. But the midday sun, 10 to 4 or 5 o'clock, no sun on the compost pile.
Okay.
Protect it with shrubs or cover it up.
Okay. So once you've chosen the location, then I would start any kitchen waste that I've got that is raw, I would just throw into the compost pile. So how do I even start it? Do I just start by throwing stuff and creating a pile that way?
So it's very important if you have bare ground, it's literally bare. It's not, you don't build the compost on grass or other vegetation, because that creates a putrid, impermeable layer, and your soil life from below will not go through to inoculate the pile. So you need to skim that area first, clear it. Then I'll fork it over with your digging fork lightly to aerate that area, to activate the soil life in that area. Again, like with the garden beds that we're talking about, we need to stay away from tree roots and hedge roots, because they're going to grow into the pile and take the nourishment out of it. So if we dig it over a bit, then we get maybe some pruning, some old wood, thick wood, branches to create a mattress, about 6 inches, 15 centimeters thick. And that provides for aeration for the pile, because the pile will go and need a lot of air once it gets active and going in the first 2 weeks. And then you just start layering your strawy, stalky material, the dry material. Then you put your kitchen waste on there that's wet and putrid and stinky and messy. And then
when you say your dry material, what do you mean? What sort of material?
Stalks
so you've got your
flowers,
branches and things. Stalks from flowers.
Thin branches from prunings.
Yeah, so you've got all that, which creates all the air. Okay.
Yeah. So if this, like a mattress type, like open area, then you put the dense material on top, like your grass clippings or your kitchen compost. Make sure you always put lime or wood ash on that, to both keep the vermin away, but also to balance the pH, so the microbes can actually digest this material, and particularly later the worms. And then you put another layer of stalky, flower stalks, any debris that, a bit of woody material that keeps the air flowing in that area, and you alternate. It was discovered in India, actually, by, gosh, forget the name now. There was Lady Eve Balfour, who started the biodynamic movement, and another famous man who also was very involved. Forget his name now, but it's the indoor system of composting. It's the most effective, and all you have to do is layer it until you have reached maybe 60 to 80 centimeters of height, and have it slightly rounded, like almost egg shape. And the rest is done by the soil life. It will mix it, it will decompose it, mix it, and humify it.
So it may take a while until you build up that way, because you will be adding more and more waste every day, or do you stop adding at some point?
Yeah, so with a home compost, obviously, as you say, you might have to just keep adding and adding, and you might want to put one of those fleeces or impermeable, semi-permeable covers. If you have a wool carpet, or if you have, again, stocky material to cover it, always cover it at last with that. It's protected, and keep building. And then once it's fully built, so either you build a pile in a day you do a big razzia, you clean everything up in the garden, build up a big pile, and then you can put the compost preparations in at the end when it's finished building.
Right. And you put them into the compost pile.
So we've got 5 preparations: the yarrow, the chamomile, the nettle, the oak bark, and the dandelion. They're solid. You put in 5 different places, 40 centimeters deep. Get a bit of soil, wrap it into the soil, drop it down a stick and push it down and close the hole. And at the end you need water, warm water, and you take the valerian, which is liquid, and you stir it for 15 minutes and sprinkle it over the compost. And then the leftover, you sprinkle it just over the garden. That attracts the worms. It will also attract cats. You gotta watch that over the garden.
Just once? You do that just once? So
you do that once when you've built it.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever turn a compost pile, you apply it again.
All the 6.
That's correct, yeah. And then 2 weeks before you're thinking of using the compost pile, and it might be just a heap of earth, you can again put the compost preparations to reactivate it.
Okay. How much compost preparation do you need?
So if you think for a kitchen compost, for a home compost, that's a meter by meter by meter.
Yeah.
What's the tip of my thumb?
The tip of your thumb.
So that volume.
Well, like the whole nail, you mean?
2 to 4 grams, depending if it's moist or dry.
Okay. Okay.
Of every of the solid, and then 5 milliliters of the valerian preparation.
5 milliliters.
Yeah.
Okay. In water. How much water?
In water, yeah. And you stir it for 15 minutes. You do the vortex stirring.
Yeah.
One way, the other way, to mix it well.
3 or 4 liters of water?
Oh, much less. You need maybe, a very small bucket, and
right.
A liter for compost is plenty. But it's easier to stir 2 to 3 liters. That's why I said if you have leftover, put the rest on the garden, because it will attract the worms and makes them more active. And just watch the cats. They're attracted by it too, the tomcats.
The cats, and the cats will come and they'll poo in the garden as well, and they'll poo everywhere.
They love this. You get extra free manure. You just watch it with your beds when the cats come, because they dig in your freshly dug beds.
So is it good if they poo in the garden?
Yeah. Okay. Free manure.
Okay.
Very concentrated.
Okay, yeah. I heard somewhere before that it was too acid or something, and that if a cat poos in the garden, then it may actually take the whole crop and ruin it, basically.
Let's say if you have crops and they poop right next to a plant, and you have a good rain, the urea from that concentrated poop is going to damage the plant roots, just like our pea.
Right. Very
rich in urea, concentrated. But, you might lose the plant, but the worms, you will see the worms and the slugs and all the animals, they will be actually starting eating that stuff. Right. So I wouldn't worry too much. Like some people say, don't put banana peels, orange peels, and what have you in the compost pile. Forget it. Put it all in. The orange peels are the best breeding ground for the compost worm. And the other thing that people could use very readily and not recycle, because it's much more expensive transport and so on. When they get cardboard from the shop, which is corrugated, put it instead of your stalks or with your stalks as a dry layer for aeration, and the compost worms in your compost pile will actually breed in there. So fantastic little trick.
Okay, great. Okay, so in terms of the material that you actually put in the compost pile from your kitchen, you're looking at raw vegetable leftovers, you're looking at fruit, orange peels, lemon peels. Will you put any onion peels and garlic peels? And
everything. Rotten stuff that's already got bacterial life that will inoculate the pile.
Okay. Is there anything you don't want in there?
I wouldn't put any. You see, nowadays there's no lead in the ink anymore. I would even sometimes put newspaper, crumble up newspaper. If I don't have enough organic dry straw, stalky material. You could even put newspaper in, but I would not put any printed stuff in there, like color printed or magazines, because they're toxic.
Right.
But cardboard and anything like that, anything that's organic. And then you just have to kind of weigh up how thick your layers are, because the organisms need a certain carbon to nitrogen ratio, which is the same like, you know, you as a human being, you have a certain need for proteins and a certain need for carbohydrates, and then you need to be balanced. And if that's not balanced, but that's something you learn as you go. You know, if you put a kitchen grass clipping thickness of 4 or 5 centimeters, and then you put 10 centimeters of the rough, strawy, stalky, dry material on top, that will make a nice combination, and you'll have a nice ratio there for the microbes to get going and the fungus and break it all down, because they need to have the right proportion to build their body mass and to have a population explosion to take down that material.
Okay. I guess one question, it looks as though we're sort of coming to an end of the compost episode, but I guess one last question would be, when is the right time to start a compost pile, or is any time the right time to start one?
For making the compost, I would say any time's good enough.
Okay.
For applying it, you want to know what you want to apply it for, and then also the compost goes through different stages, and we'll have at different stages, like we talked before, effective humus that breaks down very fast and fertilizes the plants. Or you have a long-term compost, like we said, piling it up for a year, which creates stable humus, which will more be nourishment for the soil and to give structure to the soil. That's important to know.
Right. Okay. So if you got it for a year, then you would apply it once a year to give structure to your soil. Yeah. And if you have the fast decomposing compost, then that would be something that you throw in your garden every now and then.
Every now and then is a top dressing if we see that plants stop growing, or, you know, there's a cold spell and you need to literally, with that type of compost, which is fresher, to heat up the soil and encourage the metabolism of the microorganisms, then that would help. And then also, you know, you have heavy feeders, and we can go into that at a later point with the crop rotation and all that, because you need to really be aware which vegetables need what kind of quantity of compost and at which stage is it best applied, because some that's more available, you know, is better for the leafy crops, what have you, and one that's more decomposed and soily humus rich is maybe more for the root crops and so on. We'll talk about that later in more detail. Okay.
And if you want to create a fast decomposing compost, then you don't have as many branches and harder material there, or how?
Absolutely.
Is that a difference?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So more concentrated in proteins it is, the faster. Just like an athlete eats a high protein diet, it heats up faster, it metabolizes faster, it gets more concentrated in nitrogen substances, and they boost the vegetative growth. Okay. And then, what was I going to say? There was one more thing about the compost that I wanted to.
Do you have to water it regularly?
No, that's a very good question. That's the one thing I wanted to address. So what if it goes wrong? Say you put a stick in it, you know, a nice straight stick, and your stick is your super duper technological instrument to measure temperature, to measure moisture, to measure your availability of different microbes and how fast the process goes. So you look at the color. It's your olfactometer. You smell the stick, so you see if it's putrefying or if it's actually aerated. You see the colors, so you might see a rusty color or a green bluish color. So that gives you an indication if it's too wet or too dry. So it's also a hygrometer. So just a simple hazel stick or whatever you can find is fulfilling 5 or so functions of measuring your compost pile. And you ever so often pull it out, particularly the first 2 weeks. You want to make sure when you set up the pile and your material is maybe on the dry side to add water. Okay. Whenever you put the dry material, let the dry material soak up some water. And when you build it and you take in your hand, you squeeze it, you want to have one drop come out, then it's got the right moisture content.
Right. Well, because you have been doing this for so long, I'm sure you can get a stick in there and you can smell and you can see things and you can know exactly what's happening in your compost pile just because you've been doing it for so long. I'm also sure that if I put a stick in there, all I see is a stick. And
you will see if it's a shiny, wet stick that stings and smells is horrible and is disagreeable, and your hair stands on end because it stings of putrid acid and, you know, all that. Or you can see if it's like very dry and, you know, dead, and you go, oh no, that's not very nice. You know, and in between are the variations. As you start doing it, you'll actually start seeing that you have an emotional response through your olfactory particularly. And that emotional response gives you a sign of what to do with it.
Okay. Is this something you cover in more detail in your more in detail videos?
Absolutely. We're going to, you know, show the sticks and get them. We can't get the smell across yet. We need Spielberg for that to elaborate our 5G network. Sorry. It's just a very, very nasty joke. Because that's what they want to get into the homes, is that we can convey everything, emotions even. So yeah, we have to do that finally in the garden when we get together again. And last but not least, you know, I was saying when something goes wrong, it's not too, you set it up, it's too dry. Well, what do? Well,
you put some
water.
Yeah.
Right. It's too wet. That's a bit harder. That's hard work. You set it up too wet. Too much wet material, you watered it too much when you set it up. You have to turn it and turn the outside to the inside. So the outside's usually dry, the inside's wetter. And then sometimes you have too much carbonaceous material that's rich in carbon, right? Not enough nitrogen. How do you activate the compost?
With the preps.
The preps are not enough to do that. No, they need already a fairly balanced material for the microlife and everybody to be working, and the forces and the decomposition, the composition process. They will direct that once it's started, but they can't necessarily heal your failures of putting the right proportions. So if your compost is too sluggish, it's too slow, it's not heating up, you could actually collect your pee if it's on the dry side. If it's on the wet side, it's a bit more difficult. Then you might have to add some concentrated organic fertilizer like Hufenhorn or blood meal, or, you know, something that's dry. Otherwise, you make it too wet with pee, or some people make stinging nettle manures, you know, just to water it regularly to keep it active. So there's many remedial ways to work with it, just like with human medicine and natural medicine.
Okay. So again, you speak about this in more detail in your videos, and I'm sure you've got examples of too dry compost piles, too wet, and you'll tell us what to do about them. So make sure that you sign up for those videos, all of you out there, and have access to Hans's experience and visual guidance through the compost pile and also the vegetable garden.